I read his Venetian Days about 40 years ago. I compare it with his paper on Machiavelli in a late number of Harper, and I cannot find that his English has suffered any impairment. For 40 years, his English has been to me a continual delight and astonishment. In the sustained exhibition of certain great qualities, clearness, compression, verbal exactness, and unforced and seemingly unconscious felicity of phrasing, he is, in my belief, without his peer in the English writing world. Sustained. I entrench myself behind that protecting word. There are others who exhibit those great qualities as greatly as he does, but only by intervaled distributions of rich moonlight, with stretches of veiled and dimmer landscape between, whereas Howells's moon sails cloudless skies all night and all the nights. In the matter of verbal exactness, Mr. Howells has no superior, I suppose. He seems to be almost always able to find that elusive and shifty grain of gold, the right word. Others have to put up with approximations, more or less frequently. He has better luck. To me, the others are miners working with the gold pan of necessity. Some of the gold washes over and escapes, whereas, in my fancy, he is quicksilver raiding down a riffle. No grain of the metal stands much chance of eluding him. A powerful agent is the right word. It lights the reader's way and makes it plain. A close approximation to it will answer, and much traveling is done in a well enough fashion by its help, but we do not welcome it and applaud it and rejoice in it as we do when the right one blazes out on us. Whenever we come upon one of those intensely right words in a book or a newspaper, the resulting effect is physical as well as spiritual, and electrically prompt. It tingles exquisitely around through the walls of the mouth and tastes, as tart and crisp, and good as the autumn butter that creams the sumac berry. One has no time to examine the word and vote upon its rank and standing. The automatic recognition of its supremacy is so immediate. There is a plenty of acceptable literature which deals largely in approximations, but it may be likened to a fine landscape scene through the rain. The right word would dismiss the rain, then you would see it better. It doesn't rain when Howells is at work. And where does he get the easy and effortless flow of his speech, and its cadenced and undulating rhythm, and its architectural felicities of construction, its graces of expression, its pemmican quality of compression, and all that? Born to him, no doubt, all in shining good order in the beginning, all extraordinary, and all just as shining, just as extraordinary today, after 40 years of diligent wear and tear and use. He passed his 40th year long and long ago, but I think his English of today, his perfect English, I wish to say, can throw down the glove before his English of that antique time and not be afraid. I will go back to the paper on Machiavelli now, and ask the reader to examine this passage from it which I append. I do not mean examine it in a bird's-eye way, I mean search it, study it, and of course, read it aloud. I may be wrong, still it is my conviction that one cannot get out of finely wrought literature all that is in it by reading it mutely. Mr. Dyer is rather of the opinion, first luminously suggested by Macaulay, that Machiavelli was in earnest, but must not be judged as a political moralist of our time and race would be judged. He thinks that Machiavelli was in earnest, as none but an idealist can be, and he is the first to imagine him an idealist immersed in realities, who involuntarily transmutes the events under his eye into something like the visionary issues of reverie. The Machiavelli whom he depicts does not cease to be politically a republican and socially a just man, because he holds up an atrocious despot like Caesar Borgia as a mirror for rulers. What Machiavelli beheld round him in Italy was a civic disorder in which there was oppression without statecraft, and revolt without patriotism. When a miscreant like Borgia appeared upon the scene and reduced both tyrants and rebels to an apparent quiescence, he might very well seem to such a dreamer the savior of society, whom a certain sort of dreamers are always looking for. Machiavelli was no less honest when he honored the diabolical force of Caesar Borgia than Carlyle was when at different times he extolled the strong man who destroys liberty in creating order. But Carlyle has only just ceased to be mistaken for a reformer, while it is still Machiavelli's hard fate to be so trammeled in his material that his name stands for whatever is most malevolent and perfidious in human nature. You see how easy and flowing it is, how unvexed by ruggednesses, clumsinesses, broken meters, how simple and so far as you or I can make out unstudied. How clear, how limpid, how understandable, how unconfused by cross-currents, eddies, undertows. How seemingly unadorned yet is all adornment like the lily of the valley. And how compressed, how compact, without a complacency signal hung out anywhere to call attention to it. There are 23 lines in the quoted passage, After reading it several times aloud, one perceives that a good deal of matter is crowded into that small space. I think it is a model of compactness. When I take its materials apart and work them over and put them together in my way, I find I cannot crowd the result back into the same hole, there not being room enough. I find it a case of a woman packing a man's trunk. He can get the things out, but he can't ever get them back again. The proffered paragraph is a just and fair sample. The rest of the article is as compact as it is. There are no waste words. The sample is just in other ways. Limpid, fluent, graceful, and rhythmical as it is, it holds no superiority in these respects over the rest of the essay. Also, the choice phrasing noticeable in the sample is not lonely. There is a plenty of its kin distributed through the other paragraphs. This is claiming much when that kin must face the challenge of a phrase like the one in the middle sentence. An idealist immersed in realities, who involuntarily transmutes the events under his eye into something like the visionary issues of reverie. With 100 words to do it with, the literary artisan could catch that airy thought and tie it down and reduce it to a concrete condition, visible, substantial, understandable, and all right, like a cabbage. But the artist does it with 20, and the result is a flower. The quoted phrase, like 1,000 others that have come from the same source, has the quality of certain scraps of verse which take hold of us and stay in our memories. We do not understand why, at first. All the words being the right words, none of them is conspicuous, and so they all seem inconspicuous, therefore we wonder what it is about them that makes their message take hold. The mossy marbles rest on the lips that he has pressed, in their bloom, and the names he loved to hear have been carved for many a year on the tomb. It is like a dreamy strain of moving music with no sharp notes in it. The words are all right words and all the same size. We do not notice it at first. We get the effect, it goes straight home to us, but we do not know why. It is when the right words are conspicuous that they thunder. The glory that was Greece, and the grandeur that was Rome. When I go back from Howell's old to Howell's young, I find him arranging and clustering English words well, but not any better than now. He is not more felicitous in concreting abstractions now than he was in translating, then, the visions of the eyes of flesh into words that reproduce their forms and colors. In Venetian streets, they give the fallen snow no rest. It is at once shoveled into the canals by hundreds of half-naked facchini, and now in St. Mark's place the music of innumerable shovels smote upon my ear, and I saw the shivering legion of poverty as it engaged the elements in a struggle for the possession of the piazza. But the snow continued to fall, and through the twilight of the descending flakes, all this toil and encounter looked like that weary kind of effort in dreams, when the most determined industry seems only to renew the task. The lofty crest of the bell tower was hidden in the folds of falling snow, and I could no longer see the golden angel upon its summit. But looked at across the piazza, the beautiful outline of St. Mark's Church was perfectly penciled in the air, and the shifting threads of the snowfall were woven into a spell of novel enchantment around the structure that always seemed to me too exquisite in its fantastic loveliness to be anything but the creation of magic. The tender snow had compassionated the beautiful edifice for all the wrongs of time, and so hid the stains and ugliness of decay that it looked as if just from the hand of the builder, or, better said, just from the brain of the architect. There was marvelous freshness in the colors of the mosaics in the great arches of the facade, and all that gracious harmony into which the temple rises, of marble scrolls and leafy exuberance airily supporting the statues of the saints, was 100 times etherealized by the purity and whiteness of the drifting flakes. The snow lay lightly on the golden globes that tremble like peacocks' crests above the vast domes, and plumed them with softest white. It robed the saints in ermine, and it danced over all its works, as if exulting in its beauty which filled me with subtle, selfish yearning to keep such evanescent loveliness for the little while longer of my whole life, and with despair to think that even the poor lifeless shadow of it could never be fairly reflected in picture or poem. Through the wavering snowfall, the Saint Theodore upon one of the granite pillars of the Piazzetta did not show so grim as his wont is, and the winged lion on the other might have been a winged lamb. So gentle and mild he looked by the tender light of the storm. The towers of the island churches loomed faint and far away in the dimness. The sailors in the rigging of the ships that lay in the basin wrought like phantoms among the shrouds. The gondolas stole in and out of the opaque distance more noiselessly and dreamily than ever, and a silence, almost palpable, lay upon the mutest city in the world. The spirit of Venice is there, of a city where age and decay, fagged with distributing damage and repulsiveness among the other cities of the planet, in accordance with the policy and business of their profession, come for rest and play between seasons, and treat themselves to the luxury and relaxation of sinking the shop and inventing and squandering charms all about, instead of abolishing such as they find, as is their habit when not on vacation. In the working season, they do business in Boston sometimes, and a character in the undiscovered country takes accurate note of pathetic effects wrought by them upon the aspects of a street of once dignified and elegant homes, whose occupants have moved away, and left them a prey to neglect and gradual ruin and progressive degradation. A descent which reaches bottom at last, when the street becomes a roost for humble professionals of the faith cure and fortune-telling sort. What a queer, melancholy house, what a queer, melancholy street. I don't think I was ever in a street before where quite so many professional ladies, with English surnames, preferred Madam to Mrs. on their doorplates. And the poor old place has such a desperately conscious air of going to the deuce. Every house seems to wince as you go by, and button itself up to the chin for fear you should find out it had no shirt on, so to speak. I don't know what's the reason, but these material tokens of a social decay afflict me terribly. A tipsy woman isn't dreadfuler than a haggard old house that's once been a home, in a street like this. Mr. Howells's pictures are not mere stiff, hard, accurate photographs. They are photographs with feeling in them, and sentiment, photographs taken in a dream, one might say. As concerns his humor, I will not try to say anything, yet I would try, if I had the words that might approximately reach up to its high place. I do not think anyone else can play with humorous fancies so gracefully and delicately and deliciously as he does, nor has so many to play with, nor can come so near making them look as if they were doing the playing themselves, and he was not aware that they were at it. For they are unobtrusive, and quiet in their ways, and well conducted. His is a humor which flows softly all around, about and over, and through the mesh of the page, pervasive, refreshing, health-giving, and makes no more show and no more noise than does the circulation of the blood. There is another thing which is contentingly noticeable in Mr. Howells's books. That is his stage directions, those artifices which authors employ to throw a kind of human naturalness around a scene and a conversation, and help the reader to see the one and get at meanings in the other, which might not be perceived, if entrusted unexplained to the bare words of the talk. Some authors overdo the stage directions. They elaborate them quite beyond necessity. They spend so much time, and take up so much room in telling us how a person said a thing, and how he looked and acted when he said it, that we get tired and vexed, and wish he hadn't said it at all. Other authors' directions are brief enough, but it is seldom that the brevity contains either wit or information. Writers of this school go in rags, in the matter of stage directions, the majority of them having nothing in stock but a cigar, a laugh, a blush, and a bursting into tears. In their poverty they work these sorry things to the bone. They say, replied Alfred, flipping the ash from his cigar, this explains nothing, it only wastes space. Responded Richard with a laugh. There was nothing to laugh about, there never is. The writer puts it in from habit automatically, he is paying no attention to his work, or he would see that there is nothing to laugh at. Often, when a remark is unusually and poignantly flat and silly, he tries to deceive the reader by enlarging the stage direction and making Richard break into frenzies of uncontrollable laughter. This makes the reader sad. Murmured Gladys, blushing. This poor old shop-worn blush is a tiresome thing. We get so we would rather Gladys would fall out of the book and break her neck than do it again. She is always doing it, and usually irrelevantly. Whenever it is her turn to murmur she hangs out her blush. It is the only thing she's got. In a little while we hate her, just as we do Richard. Repeated Evelyn, bursting into tears. This kind keep a book damp all the time. They can't say a thing without crying. They cry so much about nothing that by and by when they have something to cry about they have gone dry, they sob and fetch nothing. We are not moved. We are only glad. They gravel me, these stale and overworked stage directions, these carbon films that got burnt out long ago and cannot now carry any faintest thread of light. It would be well if they could be relieved from duty and flung out in the literary backyard to rot and disappear along with the discarded and forgotten steeds and halidomes and similar stage properties once so dear to our grandfathers. But I am friendly to Mr. Howells's stage directions, more friendly to them than to anyone else's, I think. They are done with a competent and discriminating art, and are faithful to the requirements of a stage direction's proper and lawful office, which is to inform. Sometimes they convey a scene, and its conditions so well that I believe I could see the scene and get the spirit and meaning of the accompanying dialogue if someone would read merely the stage directions to me and leave out the talk. For instance, a scene like this, from the undiscovered country. And she laid her arms with a beseeching gesture on her father's shoulder. She answered, following his gesture with a glance. She said, laughing nervously. She asked, turning swiftly upon him that strange, searching glance. She answered vaguely. She reluctantly admitted. But her voice died wearily away, and she stood looking into his face with puzzled entreaty. Mr. Howells does not repeat his forms, and does not need to. He can invent fresh ones without limit. It is mainly the repetition over and over again, by the third rates, of worn and commonplace and juiceless forms that makes their novels such a weariness and vexation to us, I think. We do not mind one or two deliveries of their wares, but as we turn the pages over and keep on meeting them, we presently get tired of them and wish they would do other things for a change. Replied Alfred, flipping the ash from his cigar. Responded Richard with a laugh. Murmured Gladys, blushing. Repeated Evelyn, bursting into tears. Replied the Earl, flipping the ash from his cigar. Responded the undertaker with a laugh. Murmured the chambermaid, blushing. Repeated the burglar, bursting into tears. Replied the conductor, flipping the ash from his cigar. Responded Arkwright with a laugh. Murmured the chief of police, blushing. Repeated the housecat, bursting into tears. And so on, till at last it ceases to excite. I always notice stage directions, because they fret me and keep me trying to get out of their way, just as the automobiles do. At first, then by and by they become monotonous and I get run over. Mr. Howells has done much work, and the spirit of it is as beautiful as the make of it. I have held him in admiration and affection so many years that I know by the number of those years that he is old now, but his heart isn't, nor his pen, and years do not count. Let him have plenty of them, there is profit in them for us. English as she is taught. In the appendix to Croker's Boswell's Johnson, one finds this anecdote. Cotto's soliloquy. One day Mrs. Gastrell set a little girl to repeat to him Dr. Samuel Johnson Cotto's soliloquy, which she went through very correctly. The doctor, after a pause, asked the child, what was to bring Cotto to an end? She said it was a knife. No, my dear, it was not so. My Aunt Polly said it was a knife. Why, Aunt Polly's knife may do, but it was a dagger, my dear. He then asked her the meaning of bane and antidote, which she was unable to give. Mrs. Gastrell said, you cannot expect so young a child to know the meaning of such words. He then said, my dear, how many pence are there in sixpence? I cannot tell, sir, was the half-terrified reply. On this, addressing himself to Mrs. Gastrell, he said, now, my dear lady, can anything be more ridiculous than to teach a child Cotto's soliloquy, who does not know how many pence there are in sixpence? In a lecture before the Royal Geographical Society professor, Ravenstein quoted the following list of frantic questions, and said that they had been asked in an examination. Mention all the names of places in the world derived from Julius Caesar or Augustus Caesar. Where are the following rivers? Pisuerga, Sakarya, Guadalete, Jalan, Mulda. All you know of the following: Machacha, Pilmo, Shabulos, Cravacia, Basics, Mansikert, Taksim, Saitox, Meloria, Zutphen. The highest peaks of the Karakoram range. The number of universities in Prussia. Why are the tops of mountains continually covered with snow sick? Name the length and breadth of the streams of lava, which issued from the Skapter Jokul in the eruption of 1783. That list would oversize nearly anybody's geographical knowledge. Isn't it reasonably possible that in our schools many of the questions in all studies are several miles ahead of where the pupil is? That he is set to struggle with things that are ludicrously beyond his present reach, hopelessly beyond his present strength? This remark in passing, and by way of text, now I come to what I was going to say. I have just now fallen upon a darling literary curiosity. It is a little book, a manuscript compilation, and the compiler sent it to me with the request that I say whether I think it ought to be published or not. I said yes, but as I slowly grow wise, I briskly grow cautious. And so, now that the publication is imminent, it has seemed to me that I should feel more comfortable if I could divide up this responsibility with the public by adding them to the court. Therefore, I will print some extracts from the book, in the hope that they may make converts to my judgment that the volume has merit which entitles it to publication. As to its character, everyone has sampled English as she is spoke, and English as she is wrote. This little volume furnishes us an instructive array of examples of English as she is taught in the public schools of, well, this country. The collection is made by a teacher in those schools, and all the examples in it are genuine. None of them have been tampered with or doctored in any way. From time to time, during several years, whenever a pupil has delivered himself of anything peculiarly quaint or toothsome in the course of his recitations, this teacher and her associates have privately set that thing down in a memorandum book, strictly following the original as to grammar, construction, spelling, and all, and the result is this literary curiosity. The contents of the book consist mainly of answers given by the boys and girls to questions, said answers being given sometimes verbally, sometimes in writing. The subjects touched upon are 15 in number. Etymology Roman 2, grammar Roman 3, mathematics Roman 4, geography v. original Roman 6, analysis Roman 7, history Roman 8, intellectual Roman 9, philosophy ex physiology xi, astronomy Roman 12, politics Roman 13, music Roman 14, oratory Roman 15, metaphysics. You perceive that the poor little young idea has taken a shot at a good many kinds of game in the course of the book. Now as to results. Here are some quaint definitions of words. It will be noticed that in all of these instances the sound of the word, or the look of it on paper, has misled the child. Aborigines, a system of mountains. Alias, a good man in the Bible. Amenable, anything that is mean. Ammonia, the food of the gods. Assiduity, state of being an acid. Auriferous, pertaining to an orifice. Capillary, a little caterpillar. Corniferous, rocks in which fossil corn is found. Emolument, a headstone to a grave. Equestrian, one who asks questions. Eucharist, one who plays euchre. Franchise, anything belonging to the French. Chapter 499. All-eater, a very idle person. Ipecac, a man who likes a good dinner. Irrigate, to make fun of. Mendacious, what can be mendied. Mercenary, one who feels for another. Parasite, a kind of umbrella. Parasite, the murder of an infant. Publican, a man who does his prayers in public. Tenacious, 10 acres of land. Here is one where the phrase publicans and sinners has got mixed up in the child's mind with politics, and the result is a definition which takes one in a sudden and unexpected way. Republican, a sinner mentioned in the Bible. Also in democratic newspapers now and then. Here are two where the mistake has resulted from sound, assisted by remote fact. Plagiarist, a writer of plays. Demagogue, a vessel containing beer and other liquids. I cannot quite make out what it was that misled the pupil in the following instances. It would not seem to have been the sound of the word, nor the look of it in print. Asphyxia, a grumbling, fussy temper. Quaternions, a bird with a flat beak and no bill, living in New Zealand. Quaternions, the name given to a style of art practiced by the Phoenicians. Quaternions, a religious convention held every 100 years. Sibilant, the state of being idiotic. Crozier, a staff carried by the deity. In the following sentences, the pupil's ear has been deceiving him again. The marriage was illegible. He was totally dismasted with the whole performance. He enjoys writing on a philosopher. She was very quick at repertoire. He prayed for the waters to subsidize. The leopard is watching his sheep. They had a strawberry vestibule. Here is one which, well now, how often we do slam right into the truth without ever suspecting it. The men employed by the gas company go around and speculate the meter. Indeed they do, dear, and when you grow up, many and many's the time you will notice it in the gas bill. In the following sentences, the little people have some information to convey, every time, but in my case they fail to connect. The light always went out on the keystone word. The coercion of some things is remarkable, as bread and molasses. Her hat is contiguous because she wears it on one side. He preached to an egregious congregation. The captain eliminated a bullet through the man's heart. You should take caution and be precarious. The supercilious girl acted with vicissitude when the perennial time came. The last is a curiously plausible sentence. One seems to know what it means, and yet he knows all the time that he doesn't. Here is an odd, but entirely proper, use of a word, and a most sudden descent from a lofty philosophical altitude to a very practical and homely illustration. We should endeavor to avoid extremes, like those of wasps and bees. And here, with zoological and geological in his mind, but not ready to his tongue, the small scholar has innocently gone and let out a couple of secrets which ought never to have been divulged in any circumstances. There are a good many donkeys in theological gardens. Some of the best fossils are found in theological cabinets. Under the head of grammar, the little scholars furnish the following information. Gender is the distinguishing nouns, without regard to sex. A verb is something to eat. Adverbs should always be used as adjectives, and adjectives as adverbs. Every sentence and name of God must begin with a caterpillar. Caterpillar is well enough, but capital letter would have been stricter. The following is a brave attempt at a solution, but it failed to liquefy. When they are going to say some prose or poetry, before they say the poetry or prose, they must put a semicolon just after the introduction of the prose or poetry. The chapter on mathematics is full of fruit. From it I take a few samples, mainly in an unripe state. A straight line is any distance between two places. Parallel lines are lines that can never meet until they run together. A circle is a round straight line with a hole in the middle. Things which are equal to each other are equal to anything else. To find the number of square feet in a room, you multiply the room by the number of the feet. The product is the result. Right you are. In the matter of geography, this little book is unspeakably rich. The questions do not appear to have applied the microscope to the subject, as did those quoted by Professor Ravenstein. Still, they proved plenty difficult enough without that. These pupils did not hunt with a microscope, they hunted with a shotgun. This is shown by the crippled condition of the game they brought in. America is divided into the Pacific Slope and the Mississippi Valley. North America is separated by Spain. America consists from north to south, about 500 miles. The United States is quite a small country compared with some other countries, but is about as industrious. The capital of the United States is Long Island. The 5 seaports of the U.S. are Newfoundland and San Francisco. The principal products of the U.S. is earthquakes and volcanoes. The Alleghenies are mountains in Philadelphia. The Rocky Mountains are on the western side of Philadelphia. Cape Hatteras is a vast body of water surrounded by land and flowing into the Gulf of Mexico. Mason and Dixon's line is the equator. One of the leading industries of the United States is molasses, book covers, numbers, gas, teaching, lumber, manufacturers, papermaking, publishers, coal. In Austria, the principal occupation is gathering ostrich feathers. Gibraltar is an island built on a rock. Russia is very cold and tyrannical. Sicily is one of the Sandwich Islands. Hindustan flows through the Ganges and empties into the Mediterranean Sea. Ireland is called the Emigrant Isle because it is so beautiful and green. The width of the different zones, Europe, lies in depend upon the surrounding country. The imports of a country are the things that are paid for, the exports are the things that are not. Climate lasts all the time and weather only a few days. The 2 most famous volcanoes of Europe are Sodom and Gomorrah. The chapter headed Analysis shows us that the pupils in our public schools are not merely loaded up with those showy facts about geography, mathematics, and so on, and left in that incomplete state. No, there's machinery for clarifying and expanding their minds. They are required to take poems and analyze them, dig out their common sense, reduce them to statistics, and reproduce them in a luminous prose translation, which shall tell you at a glance what the poet was trying to get at. One sample will do. Here is a stanza from The Lady of the Lake, followed by the pupil's impressive explanation of it. Alone, but with unbated zeal, the horseman plied with scourge and steel, for jaded now and spent with toil, embossed with foam and dark with soil, while every gasp with sobs he drew, the laboring stag strained full in view. The man who rode on the horse performed the whip, and an instrument made of steel alone with strong ardor not diminishing, for, being tired from the time past with hard labor, overworked with anger, and ignorant with weariness, while every breath for labor he drew with cries full of sorrow, the young deer made him perfect who worked hard filtered in sight. I see now that I never understood that poem before. I have had glimpses of its meaning, in moments when I was not as ignorant with weariness as usual, but this is the first time the whole spacious idea of it ever filtered in sight. If I were a public school pupil, I would put those other studies aside and stick to analysis, for after all, it is the thing to spread your mind. We come now to historical matters, historical remains, one might say. As one turns the pages, he is impressed with the depth to which one date has been driven into the American child's head, 1492. The date is there, and it is there to stay, and it is always at hand, always deliverable at a moment's notice. But the fact that belongs with it, that is quite another matter. Only the date itself is familiar and sure. Its vast fact has failed of lodgment. It would appear that whenever you ask a public school pupil when a thing, anything, no matter what happened, and he is in doubt, he always rips out his 1492. He applies it to everything, from the landing of the ark to the introduction of the horse car. Well, after all, it is our first date, and so it is right enough to honor it, and pay the public schools to teach our children to honor it. George Washington was born in 1492. Washington wrote the Declaration of Independence in 1492. St. Bartholomew was massacred in 1492. The Britons were the Saxons, who entered England in 1492 under Julius Caesar. The earth is 1492 miles in circumference. To proceed with history. Christopher Columbus was called the father of his country. Queen Isabella of Spain sold her watch and chain, and other millinery, so that Columbus could discover America. The Indian Wars were very desecrating to the country. The Indians pursued their warfare by hiding in the bushes and then scalping them. Captain John Smith has been styled the father of his country. His life was saved by his daughter Pocahontas. The Puritans found an insane asylum in the wilds of America. The Stamp Act was to make everybody stamp all materials, so they should be null and void. Washington died in Spain, almost broken-hearted. His remains were taken to the cathedral in Havana. Guerrilla warfare was where men rode on guerrillas. John Brown was a very good insane man who tried to get fugitive slaves into Virginia. He captured all the inhabitants, but was finally conquered and condemned to his death. The Confederacy was formed by the fugitive slaves. Alfred the Great reigned years. He was distinguished for letting some buckwheat cakes burn, and the lady scolded him. Henry VIII was famous for being a great widower, having lost several wives. Lady Jane Grey studied Greek and Latin, and was beheaded after a few days. John Bright is noted for an incurable disease. Lord James Gordon Bennett instigated the Gordon riots. The Middle Ages come in between antiquity and posterity. Luther introduced Christianity into England a good many thousand years ago. His birthday was November 1883. He was once a pope. He lived at the time of the Rebellion of Worms. Julius Caesar is noted for his famous telegram dispatch, "I came, I saw, I conquered." Julius Caesar was really a very great man. He was a very great soldier, and wrote a book for beginners in the Latin. Cleopatra was caused by the death of an asp, which she dissolved in a wine cup. The only form of government in Greece was a limited monarchy. The Persian War lasted about 500 years. Greece had only 7 wise men. Socrates destroyed some statues and had to drink shamrock. Here is a fact correctly stated, and yet it is phrased with such ingenious infelicity that it can be depended upon to convey misinformation every time it is uncarefully read. By the Salic law, no woman or descendant of a woman could occupy the throne. To show how far a child can travel in history with judicious and diligent boosting in the public school, we select the following mosaic. Abraham Lincoln was born in Wales in 1599. In the chapter headed Intellectual, I find a great number of most interesting statements. A sample or two may be found not amiss. Bracebridge Hall was written by Henry Irving. Snowbound was written by Peter Cooper. The House of the Seven Gables was written by Lord Bryant. Edgar A. Poe was a very curdling writer. Cotton Mather was a writer who invented the cotton gin and wrote histories. Beowulf wrote the scriptures. Ben Jonson survived Shakespeare in some respects. In the Canterbury Tale, it gives account of King Alfred on his way to the shrine of Thomas Bucket. Chaucer was the father of English pottery. Chaucer was a bland verse writer of the 3rd century. Chaucer was succeeded by H. Wads, Longfellow, an American writer. His writings were chiefly prose, and nearly 100 years elapsed. Shakespeare translated the scriptures, and it was called St. James because he did it. In the middle of the chapter, I find many pages of information concerning Shakespeare's plays, Milton's works, and those of Bacon, Addison, Samuel Johnson, Fielding, Richardson, Sterne, Smollett, Defoe, Locke, Pope, Swift, Goldsmith, Burns, Cowper, Wordsworth, Gibbon, Byron, Coleridge, Hood, Scott, Macaulay, George Eliot, Dickens, Bulwer, Thackeray, Browning, Mrs. Browning, Tennyson, and Disraeli. A fact which shows that into the restricted stomach of the public school pupil is shoveled every year the blood, bone, and viscera of a gigantic literature, and the same is there digested and disposed of in a most successful and characteristic and gratifying public school way. I have space for but a trifling few of the results. Lord Byron was the son of an heiress and a drunken man. W.M. Wordsworth wrote The Barefoot Boy and Imitations on Immortality. Gibbon wrote a history of his travels in Italy. This was original. George Eliot left a wife and children who mourned greatly for his genius. George Eliot, Miss Mary Evans, Mrs. Cross, Mrs. Lewis, was the greatest female poet, unless George Sandys is made an exception of. Bulwell is considered a good writer. Sir Walter Scott, Charles Bront, Alfred the Great, and Johnson were the first great novelists. Thomas Babington Macaulay graduated at Harvard and then studied law. He was raised to the peerage as baron in 1557 and died in 1776. Here are 2 or 3 miscellaneous facts that may be of value, if taken in moderation. Homer's writings are Homer's essays. Virgil, the Aeneid, and Paradise Lost. Some people say that these poems were not written by Homer, but by another man of the same name. A sort of sadness, kind of shown in Bryant's poems. Holmes is a very profligate and amusing writer. When the public school pupil wrestles with the political features of the great republic, they throw him sometimes. A bill becomes a law when the president vetoes it. The 3 departments of the government is the president rules the world, the governor rules the state, the mayor rules the city. The first conscientious Congress met in Philadelphia. The Constitution of the United States was established to ensure domestic hostility. Truth crushed to earth will rise again, as follows. The Constitution of the United States is that part of the book at the end which nobody reads. And here she rises once more and untimely. There should be a limit to public school instruction. It cannot be wise or well to let the young find out everything. Congress is divided into civilized, half-civilized, and savage. Here are some results of study in music and oratory. An interval in music is the distance on the keyboard from one piano to the next. A rest means you are not to sing it. Emphasis is putting more distress on one word than another. The chapter on physiology contains much that ought not to be lost to science. Physiology is to study about your bones, stomach, and vertebrae. Occupations which are injurious to health are carbolic acid gas, which is impure blood. We have an upper and lower skin. The lower skin moves all the time and the upper skin moves when we do. The body is mostly composed of water, and about 1/2 is avaricious tissue. The stomach is a small pear-shaped bone, situated in the body. The gastric juice keeps the bones from creaking. The chyle flows up the middle of the backbone and reaches the heart, where it meets the oxygen and is purified. The salivary glands are used to salivate the body. In the stomach, starch is changed to cane sugar, and cane sugar to sugar cane. The olfactory nerve enters the cavity of the orbit and is developed into the special sense of hearing. The growth of a tooth begins in the back of the mouth and extends to the stomach. If we were on a railroad track and a train was coming, the train would deafen our ears so that we couldn't see to get off the track. If, up to this point, none of my quotations have added flavor to the Johnsonian anecdote at the head of this article, let us make another attempt. The theory that intuitive truths are discovered by the light of nature originated from St. John's interpretation of a passage in the Gospel of Plato. The weight of the earth is found by comparing a mass of known lead with that of a mass of unknown lead. To find the weight of the earth, take the length of a degree on a meridian and multiply by 6212 pounds. The spheres are to each other as the squares of their homologous sides. A body will go just as far in the first second as the body will go plus the force of gravity, and that's equal to twice what the body will go. Specific gravity is the weight to be compared weight of an equal volume of, or that is the weight of a body compared with the weight of an equal volume. The law of fluid pressure divide the different forms of organized bodies by the form of attraction, and the number increased will be the form. Inertia is that property of bodies by virtue of which it cannot change its own condition of rest or motion. In other words, it is the negative quality of passiveness, either in recoverable latency or incipient latence. If a laugh is fair here, not the struggling child, nor the unintelligent teacher, or rather the unintelligent boards, committees, and trustees are the proper target for it. All through this little book one detects the signs of a certain probable fact, that a large part of the pupil's instruction consists in cramming him with obscure and wordy rules, which he does not understand and has no time to understand. It would be as useful to cram him with brickbats, they would at least stay. In a town in the interior of New York, a few years ago, a gentleman set forth a mathematical problem and proposed to give a prize to every public school pupil who should furnish the correct solution of it. 22 of the brightest boys in the public schools entered the contest. The problem was not a very difficult one for pupils of their mathematical rank and standing, yet they all failed by a hair through one trifling mistake or another. Some searching questions were asked, when it turned out that these lads were as glib as parrots with the rules, but could not reason out a single rule or explain the principle underlying it. Their memories had been stocked, but not their understandings. It was a case of brickbat culture, pure and simple. There are several curious compositions in the little book, and we must make room for one. It is full of naivete, brutal truth, and unembarrassed directness, and is the funniest, genuine boys' composition I think I have ever seen. On girls. Girls are very stuck up and dignified in their manner and behavior. They think more of dress than anything and like to play with dowels and rags. They cry if they see a cow in a far distance and are afraid of guns. They stay at home all the time and go to church on Sunday. They are always sick. They are always funny and making fun of boys' hands, and they say how dirty. They can't play marbles. I pity them, poor things. They make fun of boys and then turn round and love them. I don't believe they ever killed a cat or anything. They look out every night and say, "Oh, Aunt the Moon lovely." There is one thing I have not told, and that is they always know their lessons better'n boys. From Mr. Edward Channing's recent article in Science. The marked difference between the books now being produced by French, English, and American travelers, on the one hand, and German explorers on the other, is too great to escape attention. That difference is due entirely to the fact that in school and university the German is taught, in the first place to see, and in the second place to understand what he does see. A simplified alphabet. This article, written during the autumn of 1899, was about the last writing done by Mark Twain on any impersonal subject. I have had a kindly feeling, a friendly feeling, a cousinly feeling towards simplified spelling, from the beginning of the movement 3 years ago, but nothing more inflamed than that. It seemed to me to merely propose to substitute one inadequacy for another, a sort of patching and plugging poor old dental relics with cement and gold and porcelain paste. What was really wanted was a new set of teeth. That is to say, a new alphabet. The heart of our trouble is with our foolish alphabet. It doesn't know how to spell and can't be taught. In this, it is like all other alphabets except one, the phonographic. That is the only competent alphabet in the world. It can spell and correctly pronounce any word in our language. That admirable alphabet, that brilliant alphabet, that inspired alphabet, can be learned in an hour or two. In a week, the student can learn to write it with some little facility and to read it with considerable ease. I know, for I saw it tried in a public school in Nevada 45 years ago, and was so impressed by the incident that it has remained in my memory ever since. I wish we could adopt it in place of our present written and printed character. I mean simply the alphabet, simply the consonants and the vowels. I don't mean any reductions or abbreviations of them, such as the shorthand writer uses in order to get compression and speed. No, I would spell every word out. I will insert the alphabet here as I find it in Burnts's phonic shorthand. It is arranged on the basis of Isaac Pitman's phonography. Isaac Pitman was the originator and father of scientific phonography. It is used throughout the globe. It was a memorable invention. He made it public 73 years ago. The firm of Isaac Pitman and Sons, New York, still exists, and they continue the master's work. What should we gain? First of all, we could spell definitely and correctly any word you please just by the sound of it. We can't do that with our present alphabet. For instance, take a simple, everyday word thesis. If we tried to spell it by the sound of it, we should make it theses and be laughed at by every educated person. Secondly, we should gain in reduction of labor in writing. Simplified spelling makes valuable reductions in the case of several hundred words, but the new spelling must be learned. You can't spell them by the sound, you must get them out of the book.